information and communication. The limits of media discourse. Case study: Romanian school in the news during the COVID crisis. Journalism is a type of communication that works constantly under pressure. The urgency of communication is, in fact, the professional journalistic rhythm. Journalistic communication is also under the sign of novelty and under the market laws. Between these extremes, the press must fulfill a series of social discursive functions: the function of information, interpretation, connection, education, entertainment. Journalism responds to the laws of the market, to what specialists call the news value. There are the main pragmatic items that transform an event into a journalistic material. Those items bring together characteristics of journalistic content that refer to the frequency, routine, affected and involved people, their relevance from different perspectives, the emotional charges of feature, and so on. The news criteria filter supports editorial decisions and directs journalistic discourse to a certain number of type of receivers. The press also assumes a certain type of role depending on the relationship with the establishment. It is a relationship that journalist establishes, recognizes, and sets, and he should declare it. Those classical theories set as boundaries for defining the journalistic mission, the totalitarian societies that impose total control over journalistic communication, and democratic societies in which the market of journalistic ideas is regulated by demand and supply, by the negotiation of significations and symbols. Modern theories see the social roles of press starting from how the journalists positions themselves towards the establishment, but also from the way the establishment itself is weak or strong. The question of this study is: how does the journalistic perception of one's mission change in conditions of pressure, crisis? How is the one we are going through? Our research covers the journalistic discourse in Romania during a year from the moment of declaring the state of emergency. One of the hypotheses was that the type of journalistic discourse is specific to the crisis communication. We use the term crisis in the sense of a time gap between routine procedures and new problems. This gap, this asynchrony between new procedures and problems generates creative solutions. Thus, we wanted to see how journalists understand to fulfill their role in the context of the new crisis. We arrived at the second hypothesis of our study. From the first moment of the declaring the state of emergency, the quality and soft journalists assume a monitoring role in form and the facilitating role of informational posting in fact. To prove this hypothesis, we took into account the arguments formulated by Clifford G. Christian and his researcher team. They continued and updated the theory created by Fred Zibert and all that systematized the role of the press in society. In the public space, the topics related to the health issue were together with the education topics. The online school and the digital training or illiteracy of the teachers are the main topics that have fed and continue to do so the journalistic discourse about Romanian educational system. Until now, topics about the educational aspects were in the area of scapegoating narratives in Fisher's definition. This type of narrative is built on rhetoric of guilt, of accusation, and the main subject of this construction were the teacher. We also wondered if and how much of this rhetoric was preserved. case study. For this paper, we choose 3 publications. A publication intended exclusively for educational purposes, edupedu.ro, a publication that assumes the mission of quality journalism, Libertatea, and the television site kanald.ro. We choose these publications primarily because they were not the subject of accusations of political partisanship. The first is dedicated exclusively to education and research issues. The second has undergone a discreet but vigorous rebranding process from tabloid journalism to quality journalism through investigation and reports that have been cited by many national media institutions. The last one has employers from outside Romania, is a general channel with programs in the area of entertainment, and the news journals come from the area of soft and spot news. We think about Ken Metzler now, of course. We analyze a total of 3,358 text news stories reports from the moment of the state of emergency, March 16, 2020, until April 10, 2021. We follow the thematic field and the sources used by journalists. Regarding the selection of topics on edupedu.ro, the journalists from Edupedu gave space and importance to following topics: the degree of infection in schools, testing in schools, financing of studies, changing the structure of the school year together with the exams and educational tests. Of the 2,960 materials we saw, 48% had a source and subject intervened by the decision makers. By decision makers, we mean both member of the government, prime minister, minister, secretary of state, the presidency, but also the coordinators of medical actions, the strategic communication group, the coordinator of the vaccination campaign. The journalists retrieved their public interventions in the form of the press conference, briefings, announcements, press release, and statements. The reason of these actions were the transmission of official information to the public. 4% of the materials were about pupils and students. Most of the materials also came in the form of routine events, statements, press releases of student organizations, official letters. edupedu.ro also published topics related to the academic context, 3%. These materials were about plagiarism, the scandal of online evaluations, university responses to the state of emergency, institutional statements. Parents and teachers have only 1% of the total materials dedicated to the education system. In most cases, the parents are present also through institutional communication, through the press releases and statements of the association president. The materials about teachers refer to the protest and working conditions. The other materials, the 43%, are about the comparisons with the foreign system, the involvement of economic agents in education, usually through donation, COVID protection method or materials that do not have a direct or a very weak one connection with our topic. The newspaper Libertatea dedicates a full section to the school year 2020-2021, and we can find all the materials dedicated to this topic. Also, it published there the project School 9, but it is not the topic of our study, except articles that appeared in newspapers. All the materials published by Libertatea journalists are written in the pandemic context. We analyzed 310 materials, news and reports. 39% of these are based on the statements of decision makers, Minister of Education, Prime Minister, President of Romania, government representatives in territory. Parents are the source for 5% of these materials, which refer to the possibility of staying home to supervise children during online school, ways to protect against COVID. Students are the source for 6% of these materials, and the teachers are the source for 4% of them, including the position of the various unions in the field. These are about the changes in the structure of the school year, only one paper, one piece. The vaccination survey, the need of specialization for online teaching, risk they are subject to, the opinions of some experts on how the online school should be managed. 46 of material refer to the effects of COVID, announcements of school closures, number of infected, and so on. Moreover, the journalist from Libertatea gave space and importance to the following topics: the school year structure, student testing, exams, return to school scenarios, vaccination of teachers, poor conditions of students, and lack of teacher training. On kanald.ro website, we identified 88 materials for the period for this time in question. 92% of these are built on the logic of routine events, press conference, press briefings, statements, decision makers, regulations, official announcements. As materials that have a starting point other actors of the education process besides student and teacher, we identified only seven pieces, not percentage. They are part of the category of conflict, 8%, and are about the death of students and erotic scandals that have teachers as protagonists. No parent is the main source of material. The topics selected by kanald.ro journalists cover the school starting, regulation and procedures, as well as the issue of little spring presents in the current conditions. We also highlight that only a single text that explores the student's life and problems, and that one is built starting from a statement of public figure named Xenia. We couldn't find these topics in the other two publications that we analyzed. However, the attention of journalists is focused on creating suspense, emphasizing conflicts to get attention, arousing curiosity through sentences that underline the use of rhetorical interrogations. Terms such as last minute, clearly said, actually, dramatized the communication process, the content of which in essence is dependent on official communication. Findings. Reading the materials from our selection through the paradigm proposed by Fisher, we notice that the journalistic discourse referred to what Fisher calls the paradigm of the rational world. The journalist relied mainly on information obtained from the statement of the decision makers, whose identity has now overlapped with the one of the expert in the health field. The texts are therefore logical and argumentative. Fisher remarked that the paradigm of the rational world is based on rationality but excludes the common man, that means the audience to which journalism is addressed. Compared to the crisis of 2008, when journalism itself was under economic threat, now the situation is different from the perspective of the type of topics, of the changes of the professional procedures. In the first way, the journalist had not direct access to the topic. This is a first result of our research. In addition to the urgency of assimilating a rated specialized field, medical journalism, the journalists themselves, as well as their sources, had to relate remotely, respecting a series of protocols imposed by the health crisis. Journalists are therefore on two fronts: rapid accommodation with a specialized file, the acquisition of new professional skills, and the rapid assimilation of physical protection uh, procedures. In 2008, the press is facing a sharp increase of the public interest, but this time of medical journalism. This made them rethink their agenda. During the economic crisis in the Western countries, the press was reproached for being intimidated by the resonances of the world crisis and could not respond to the mission to explain or to inform. Another difference we noticed was that the press was no longer reluctant to cover a topic, but the common topic of press references was misinformation and the phenomenon of fake news. So far, in the medical crisis, the press has had to deal with a lack of public confidence on the one hand, and on the other hand, with an undermining professional discourse by fake journalists. These kind of structures do not have an interested in informing the audience to create a coherent informational link between the establishment and the public, but precisely to jam, to disturb the connection. The topic infernal spiral during the economic and financial crisis has accumulated in these new crises terms such as conspiracy, misinformation, fake news. This is the context, the ambience that affect both the issuer and the receiver. Then journalists have started a genuine fight to protect their credibility. From our observation, it emerged that this fear of contamination with false information generated in the quality press a conformism, such as the assumption overall rather of facilitating the information of carrier and not a watchdog. Conclusion. Our paper have shown us that this conformity, the status of communication channel, is a characteristic of the mediated discourse in the analyzed period. When we do not talk about the strongly political ideologies discourse, we are focused on the extremely prudent journalism, which does not abandon the establishment agenda. The effects of minimal dramatization, the logic of serialization, the development of a rhetoric of the health crisis, structured on the idea of statistic, heroes, regressions, fed by insisted moral connotation, are minimal. Thank you.